Everybody, this video is going to be about the week 1 journal assignment and LIB 102. This week we are reading Descartes Meditations, and we are examining the development of the scientific method and limits to human knowledge. So if you'll bear with me here, I'll just briefly read this and then walk you through this assignment. So Descartes opens his meditations by describing a crisis of doubt brought on by the radical changes in scientific and religious ideas in the 17th century. He says, "Some years ago I was struck by how many false things I had believed." That's in Meditation 1. And he sets out on a way to overcome his doubts and to find certainty. His response might seem extreme. Remember, Descartes questions everything, goes to the very foundations of things in the attempt to doubt everything. In order to find certainty, he attempted to doubt everything and rebuild his beliefs from scratch using pure reason. In this journal, you will reflect on this extreme response and try to understand what would compel someone to rethink their entire belief system. In 2 to 3 pages, describe a time when you felt compelled to rethink everything you believed, and then describe how you were able to rebuild your beliefs from scratch. If you've never experienced such a time, then describe what it would take for you to feel the need to rethink everything. And then describe how you would be able to rebuild your beliefs from scratch. Either way, be sure to discuss the role of reason and certainty in rebuilding your beliefs. For example, you might consider questions or discussing questions such as, is reason enough to build a satisfactory belief system, or do you need something more than reason alone? Are you able to achieve certainty, or instead, must you learn to live without certainty or with uncertainty? Okay, so let's get the logistics out of the way. 2 to 3 pages, double spaced, and a minimum of 2 full pages. Don't make me reformat your paper with regular margins and all of those things. But you should be able to fill in way more than 2 pages with your ideas about this. Okay, so what do you need to do? So the first thing you need to do is talk about a time where you felt compelled to rethink everything you believed. And then if you haven't ever done that, then you need to imagine the conditions of your existence where you would actually be forced to do that, or where you would do that. And then you need to relate this back to how you would rebuild, or how you have rebuilt your fundamental belief system. And then there's some questions at the end here related to reason. So of course you'll want to be making allusions, references back to Descartes where possible, and the method of, or the methodological doubt that he undertakes. So what are some things that cause humans to rethink their beliefs? Well, some of you might be religious, or maybe you were raised in religious families, and you might have had, quote, a crisis of faith. One in which maybe you questioned the religious teachings that you had been taught. Perhaps you no longer believe in that religion. Perhaps, and if that's the case, then obviously you have critiqued, you have doubted, and then you've rebuilt your beliefs with something else. Now, you might be in a state where you feel lost, where you feel now that you don't have this fundamental belief in God, or some sort of big other to ground your meaning in your existence. Maybe right now you're in the middle of the point where you're like, wow, like I used to believe that there was a God who created me and cares about me, and now I'm alone on earth. Now, how do I know that the actions that I'm doing are good actions, or the right ones? What does right even mean? What does right even mean in the context of a world without God, right? A world without religion, or where we could question, the ethical principles of the Quran or the Bible, the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. So that's one thing that you could talk about if you have gone through that in your life. That's probably one of the most earth-shattering things. Now, closely related to that are all sorts of other events in our lives that could cause us to rethink things. The death of a loved one might cause us to reflect on things. And again, that can relate back to God, especially people maybe who have lost children and things. Of course, if you believe in a benevolent creator, you would wonder what the heck is going on if you lost a child. Maybe you found your meaning and your purpose in your job, and then you were let go or fired. And so now you've had to have a crisis in the sense of your identity was wrapped up in your work relationships and who you were at work and your accolades and your successes. And now you don't have that anymore. And you're left struggling, thinking about who you are as a person. I turned a certain age this year, and that age is often a time where men in particular, well, men and women both do this in different ways, but have the midlife crisis, right? And that is a time where one might feel that life is not as exciting anymore, or that the wonder and enjoyment that you had in your experiences in life has now faded, and you're left a little bit less open, less joyful, a little bit more curmudgeon-y. You feel yourself becoming your parent, becoming your father, becoming your mother, and you're desperately trying to hold on to your own identity while you feel yourself falling into this nothingness where life has no meaning and purpose anymore. I'm not saying that's what I'm going through. But anyway, these are all examples of things that might drive you to take on this methodological doubt, to doubt everything. But then you would want to talk about how you could rebuild those beliefs from scratch. And really nothing is really rebuilt from scratch when it comes to the human psyche, right? We are a mixture of all of our experiences and traumas and joys and emotions, motivations, and then all of these fundamental drives and things that aren't even conscious, but that are forcing us to feel anxiety or happiness and all of these. So anyway, you can see that it can get very complex, and I would encourage you to just dive into all of this and to talk about these things and how you might rebuild. And also, we're starting from the viewpoint of reason, right? This concept that has guided, these were modern philosophers, even though you might think that the modern time is right now. Technically, in philosophy, the moderns kind of begin in the 1500s, and then extend kind of into the 1800s. But so this was a modern ideal, like reason will lead us to truth. Reason will help us overcome the plight of humanity. Reason will allow us to become God in a certain sense. And of course, reason has done those things in a limited capacity, and maybe not so limited. We are very lucky to live in a world where we have vaccines that for diseases that ravaged populations, even in our parents' lifetime or our grandparents' lifetimes, things that would have crippled or totally killed thousands of children. Now we don't even have to worry about it anymore. We have cancer treatments that are so far advanced, even compared to 20 or 30 years ago, that many people have the opportunity to live for a long time, even after having diagnoses. We have clean water. We are not dying of dysentery and bloodborne diseases or waterborne diseases. And actually there are people on earth who still do, right? And actually diarrhea is one of the primary killers of children around the world because of lack of clean water and also lack of just IVs and stuff like that. So reason in a certain sense has led to all of these discoveries and all of these positive changes, but at the same time it's limited, right? And unfortunately we don't have answers to some of the major questions, like, does God exist? Like, there are arguments for that and against that position. But there are some fundamental things that we don't know yet, or perhaps we will never know about that. And there are all sorts of fundamental things that people are trying to figure out and working on, but that the answers at least have eluded us. and especially in the realm of philosophy, what we're doing in this class, or at least right now, these are questions that people have been talking about for thousands of years. And while we have inched closer and provided explanations and some theories and things like that, there is no one definitive theory, for example, that grounds ethics in something that's non-theological. There have been attempts, and that doesn't mean that if you don't believe in God, you can't be ethical or you can't live a good life. And then, of course, on the opposite side, there are all sorts of problems of grounding ethics in specific religions, right? And I keep coming back to ethics because usually ethics is the realm in which people have this crisis, especially if they are no longer religious, or even this is something that many religious people experience because they still deal with doubt and whether what they're doing is the right thing or the wrong thing. And if you actually read the Bible, which I think most people don't do, especially the people who claim to be are the most arrogant in their profession of belief. But the Bible has numerous contradictions about ethical behavior. In some places it says certain things, and in others it says others. And that's why we have different theologies that emerge out of this throughout the history of Christianity and other religions. And yet, you have people saying, well, Christians believe this. Well, that's a pretty hasty generalization, right? Because you can't speak for all Christians. And by the way, channeling Henry Miller here, has there ever been a Christian? Perhaps the only Christian was Jesus himself. Since then, there probably has never been one, but maybe there has been. And so anyway, you might be thinking this guy's all over the place and he's going nowhere. And you're absolutely right, except for the fact that all of that relates back to this. What I'm doing is talking about the seeds of doubt. Are we determined? Are we free? The Bible says both, right? And if you're not religious, it's still a question to be dealt with because it extends out into all of this stuff. And if we can't know whether we're determined or free, then how can we know whether or not we should punish people? Are serial killers determined? Well, that's an interesting question. Some people are severely abused, and it causes cognitive ruptures and trauma in them that then becomes manifest in these behaviors and these desires. Other people are severely abused, and they end up drawing a line in the sand, and they love in a way that they weren't loved, and they refuse to abuse, and things like that. But if we're determined, then the serial killer must be a serial killer. And the one who is able to stand in the face of that is just the manifestation of all of their internal being, as well as the circumstances. So anyway, okay, I'll stop there. But I hope that this has inspired you to think about some of the things that could ground an analysis of the sufficiency of reason and whether or not we can live with certainty about the most fundamental things. I look forward to your papers. And again, if you're in my class, feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have or anything that you want me to look at.